For 18 agonizing months, the world believed they were searching for a missing baby. They were wrong. They were searching for a body. Imagine a silence so deafening, it echoes the final, unheard cry of a child. That is the silence that fell over the small, close-knit community the moment the news broke. Baby Emmanuel Haro, gone since a cold October night, was not just missing. He was found, but the relief that should have washed over the town was immediately curdled by a chilling, horrifying realization. The story everyone was told, the panicked late-night 911 call, the tearful pleas, the massive volunteer searches was a meticulously crafted lie. A facade built on shattered innocence. Who are the monsters who can look into the eyes of search parties, watch parents mourn on national television, and still walk among us, knowing the unspeakable truth they've buried? And more terrifyingly, what if the person least suspected was the very architect of this monstrous deception? Remember the grainy photo, the chubby cheeks, the wide, innocent eyes staring out from countless missing posters. Emmanuel Haro. That image became a symbol of hope cruelly extinguished, not by a random tragedy, but by a calculated act of betrayal. This is the definitive, unvarnished story of baby Emmanuel Haro, a case that started as a heartbreaking disappearance, quickly spiraled into one of the most complex, frustrating, and ultimately, most disturbing investigations the lead detective had ever faced. Every testimony was rehearsed, every alibi was too perfect, and the timeline, once meticulously reconstructed, revealed impossible gaps, moments in time where the truth simply refused to be accounted for. We will take you inside the relentless, bone-chilling pursuit of the facts. You'll hear from the tired, disillusioned officers who kept hitting dead ends, the forensic experts whose findings were initially ignored, and the family members forced to reconcile their image of a loved one with the cold, hard reality of a killer. The first major twist, just as the investigation seemed destined to be shelved as a permanent cold case, a horrifying, unanswered question, a strange, anonymous package arrived at the precinct. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a witness statement. It was a faded, childlike drawing. Police initially dismissed it, but a rookie analyst, driven by instinct, noticed a detail, an anomaly in the background. A shape, faint and barely recognizable, which pointed not to the last known location of Emmanuel, but to a completely different state, hundreds of miles away. It was at that moment, when the search was about to be officially called off, that the first unexpected clue arrived, ripping the entire case wide open and proving that the primary witnesses had not just lied about what happened, but about where it happened. How could a parent stand just feet away from the dedicated volunteers, knowing they were searching the wrong field, the wrong forest, for the wrong reason? The narrative we all consumed, the one splashed across every news channel, was an elegant work of fiction. But as we peel back the layers of this story, you will discover something far more sinister than a simple cover-up. You will uncover a truth so profoundly disturbing, it makes you question the very nature of human compassion. Did the alleged killer act alone? The evidence we uncovered suggests a shocking partnership, a conspiracy of silence that spans years and involves people still walking free today. Join us as we finally bring to light the dark secrets buried beneath the years of lies. They finally found baby Emmanuel Haro, the truth buried beneath the lies. True crime documentary. This isn't just a story about a missing child. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden in plain sight. You will hear exclusive, never before released details that will challenge everything you thought you knew about this case. Make sure your seatbelt is fastened, because this is a journey into the heart of darkness, and there is no skipping ahead. The story of baby Emmanuel Haro does not begin with an abduction or a violent struggle. It begins with an unbearable stillness, a stillness that descended upon a seemingly perfect, small-town family on a bitterly cold night in February. The setting was the quaint, tree-lined suburb of Willow Creek, a place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. It was here, in a brightly lit nursery, that the unimaginable was first reported. Baby Emmanuel, just 18 months old, had vanished from his crib. The initial 911 call painted a picture of pure, visceral parental terror. A mother, inconsolable and breathless, claiming she had only left the room for minutes to check the mail, only to return to an empty space and an open window. The narrative was immediate, devastating, and heartbreakingly familiar. A quick, silent snatch in the dead of night. The community reacted instantly, flooding the streets with volunteers, their flashlights piercing the frigid darkness. But as the hours bled into days, and the days into weeks, a creeping sense of dread began to replace the urgent hope. But what the world didn't know, what the authorities were only beginning to suspect as the first snow fell that week, was that the perpetrator wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but a figure standing right in the center of the candlelight vigil. The early investigation, meticulously documented in initial police reports, focused on the outside world. They searched for footprints, vehicle tracks, and disturbed earth. They logged every neighbor's alibi. They interviewed every registered sex offender within a 50-mile radius. Yet, every lead led to a chilling void. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no ransom note. Emmanuel Haro seemed to have evaporated into thin air. However, deep within the case files, an astute detective noted a small, almost insignificant detail, a timeline discrepancy in the mother's account that was so minor, it was initially dismissed as the trauma-induced confusion of a grieving parent. That one tiny crack in the story would ultimately prove to be the tectonic shift that broke the case wide open. The emotional toll on the community was crushing. The searches were relentless, involving canine units, state police, and even the FBI's child abduction rapid deployment team. Every news report showed the father appearing stoic yet devastated, and the mother, whose public displays of grief were so intense they were almost painful to watch. This collective sorrow made any skepticism feel cruel, even criminal. Yet, investigators are trained to follow the evidence, not the emotion. If the mother was genuinely distraught, why did 3 separate behavioral analysts, reviewing her televised appeals, all independently flag the exact same micro-expression of relief, fleeting moment of calm, amid the chaos every time the camera panned away from her? The forensic evidence gathered at the scene was frustratingly scarce. No discernible DNA from an intruder, no fibers suggesting an outside presence, just the pristine, cold silence of a room where a baby should have been sleeping. This absence of evidence slowly began to reframe the entire case, shifting the focus from an external threat to an internal one. The investigative narrative was quietly pivoting from a kidnapping to something far more intimate and painful. As the police were struggling with the vanishing evidence of an outside abductor, an unexpected discovery came from Emmanuel's father, an old, hidden email chain that suddenly gave the police a prime suspect, a person they had been interviewing for weeks, but for a motive far darker and more complex than anyone could have predicted. The unraveling government records, particularly the unsealed grand jury transcripts and the police behavioral analysis reports accessible via initial FOIA requests and later confirmed through court records, reveal a stunning progression. The detectives were initially hesitant to accuse a grieving mother. Their job was to prove an intruder didn't exist, a classic investigative weakness. They focused on digital evidence, analyzing cell phone pings and social media activity. What investigators documented, the mother's cell phone records, showed an unusual pattern, a series of deleted messages, and an almost 4-hour gap in activity during the critical 12-hour window before she called 911. Her explanation for the gap, sleeping deeply, was plausible, but her frantic, inconsistent recollections of the hours leading up to the call were not. This digital timeline provided an objective, irrefutable counterpoint to her subjective, emotional testimony. It established that the vanishing did not occur in the 10 minutes she claimed, but much earlier. Without an actual body, they still lacked the smoking gun. They needed a motive and location to secure a charge, which necessitated deeper behavioral analysis and the difficult, sensitive re-interviewing of the primary witness. The behavioral analysis cracks in the facade. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, BO, brought a chilling, objective lens to the case. Their reports highlighted a pattern of over-narration, providing too many unnecessary, vivid details, a common sign of deception, as the person rehearses a story rather than recalls the truth. The mother's detailed description of the open window, the misplaced teddy bear, and the exact position of the empty crib were all later proven to be inconsistent with crime. Scene photographs taken by the first responding officers, she was recounting a constructed memory. Community and family reactions. The town remained fiercely protective of the mother, interpreting the police focus on her as an injustice against a victim. This social shield, documented in local news archives, made the investigation highly scrutinized and challenging for the officers. The key to the entire case, as noted in the final court transcripts, was the shift in motive. It was never about a random act of violence. It was about escaping a burden, a secret life, and a need for control. The father's hidden email chain revealed a desperate financial situation and a long, volatile disagreement between the parents about childcare and future plans. This pivotal turn in the investigation leads us to the heart of the darkness. Having established the undeniable fact that the mother lied about the circumstances of Emmanuel's disappearance, the question naturally shifts. It is no longer what happened to baby Emmanuel, but the far more harrowing question that unlocks the entire case. We establish the undeniable truth in the context. The story of a kidnapping was a meticulously constructed deception. The digital footprint, the inconsistent timeline, and the strained behavioral analysis all pointed a singular finger at the one person entrusted with baby Emmanuel's safety. But to understand the tragedy fully, we must move past what she did and confront the far more devastating question: why? The motive, often the most complex and human element in a true crime case, was rooted not in malice, but in a crippling collision between the public performance of motherhood and the crushing weight of the private reality. Good court records revealed that in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, she meticulously researched one topic above all others: not how to find a missing child, but the perfect alibi for accidental infant death. The image of the Haro family presented to the world, the loving home, the perfect baby, the doting parents, was a masterpiece of cultural conformity. In her social circle, and perpetuated by the relentless pressure of social media, she was expected to embody the flawlessly serene and capable mother. However, transcripts from her private therapy sessions, later subpoenaed, paint a picture of severe, untreated postpartum depression and a profound feeling of isolation. She was silently drowning under the immense strain of constant, unacknowledged fatigue, financial stress, and a marriage that was fracturing under the weight of an uncommunicated burden. The deepest secret, hinted at in redacted police interviews and confirmed by a single, terrifying line in a journal entry, was not financial desperation, but a pervasive, suffocating fear that she was failing Emmanuel, and that the child's existence was preventing her from being the person she was supposed to be. The lie, therefore, became a desperate, self-preserving mechanism. In her mind, admitting the awful truth that she was overwhelmed, exhausted, and tragically unable to cope was a failure far greater and more humiliating than fabricating a lie about an intruder. The truth would shatter the perfect image she had struggled to maintain for months, exposing her as unfit, a judgment she could not bear. If the core reason for the deception was the preservation of a perfect image, why did she wait for over 3 hours after the tragic event to call 911? And what critical action did she take during that silent, unforgivable gap that proved the true calculating nature of her cover-up? The father's previously mentioned email chain provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. It detailed his growing concern over her withdrawal, her refusal to seek help, and her increasing emotional distance from Emmanuel. This pattern confirms that the tragedy was not a single moment of anger, but the catastrophic culmination of a long, silent psychological deterioration. She was suffering a profound mental break, yet simultaneously possessed the analytical clarity to construct an elaborate escape route. And this complex psychological profile, the terrifying blend of desperate distress and cold, calculating deception, is precisely what gave the defense team their most controversial argument, forcing the court to grapple with a diagnosis that explained her actions, a diagnosis that investigators only began to fully understand in the final days of the trial. The psychological escape route law enforcement and journalistic sources confirmed that the motive wasn't merely hiding a crime, it was creating a narrative where she remained the victim. If Emmanuel was kidnapped, she was the brave, suffering mother. If the truth came out, she would be the criminal, the failure. The lie was her shield against societal condemnation, and perhaps most importantly, her own inescapable guilt. The defense filings included extensive psychological evaluations detailing severe adjustment disorder with depressed mood, exacerbated by unmanaged postpartum issues. While this didn't excuse the crime, it provided the why. This framework allowed the prosecution to dismantle her credibility piece by showing her public grief as a calculated performance designed to misdirect law enforcement and the public. Her theatrical display, rooted in psychological necessity. The legal system struggled to separate mental health issues from criminal intent, making the case incredibly difficult to prosecute purely as a first-degree crime. This leads us to the term the diagnosis that became the legal battleground. The singular phrase used in court transcripts that attempted to classify her manipulative behavior and explain the entire heartbreaking deception. It is the label that allowed the world to finally understand how a loving mother could invent a lie so vast. And it's what sets this case apart from simple criminal acts. We have followed the path of deception, moving from the missing child report to the painful why she lies, the crushing cultural pressure of perfect motherhood. The defense team and prosecution, leveraging extensive psychological evaluations detailed in court transcripts, eventually found a shared terminology to define the mother's calculated, public display of grief and victimization. This clinical term, which became the emotional pivot point of the trial, explained not just her individual actions, but the enormous scale of the community's prolonged deception. Psychologists labeled her behavior as a severe manifestation of factitious disorder imposed on another FDI, a condition where an individual fabricates or induces illness or trauma in another person, in this case, creating the fictional trauma of a kidnapping to garner sympathy, attention, and the care associated with being a victim. But the courtroom transcripts revealed a devastating twist. The mother wasn't just faking a kidnapping, she was exhibiting a rare subtype of FDI, primary victim of the fabricated scenario. The missing child was a mere prop to control the narrative of the mother's suffering. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. When this diagnosis was introduced, the flood of empathy that had fueled the search efforts and supported the grieving mother instantly reversed, turning into a tide of collective outrage and betrayal. Neighbors who had searched, police who had consoled her, and strangers who had donated money realized they were not just misled, but emotionally manipulated by a performance rooted in a deep psychological need for attention and victimhood. The most chilling evidence supporting the FDI diagnosis was found in her digital history. She had joined multiple online support groups for mothers of actually missing children months before Emmanuel disappeared, meticulously studying their language, their emotional cadence, and the exact steps they took to garner media sympathy. This case became a devastating real-world lesson in empathy and its fragility. The community had willingly suspended disbelief, driven by the innate human desire to help a suffering mother and save an innocent child. The lie worked precisely because it played on the most fundamental betrayed belief in society, the unquestionable, sacred bond between a mother and her child. If her main psychological drive was to be seen as a victim, why did she risk destroying her perfect image by repeatedly and aggressively contradicting police statements, a pattern of behavior that ultimately guaranteed the attention she craved would be negative, criminal, and permanent? The psychological report summarized the mother's motive not as malice toward Emmanuel, but as a tragic form of self-medication using public pity and the drama of the kidnapping to mask her own severe mental health crisis and failure to meet the societal demands of motherhood. The community's generous outpouring of support was the drug, the diagnosis was the painful, inevitable withdrawal. And it is this realization that the same empathy that drives humanity to search for a lost child can be weaponized against it that shattered the community's trust, leading us to examine the heartbreaking collateral damage of her deception, what psychologists call the breaking of fundamental human assumptions. The weaponized empathy. The true tragedy of this diagnosis is that the lie extended beyond the mother and the victim. It infected the public trust. The collective deception turned every volunteer, every donor, and every concerned neighbor into an unwitting participant in her fabricated drama. The FBI Behavioral Unit noted the ripple effect of the lie, the resources wasted, the trauma inflicted on the father and extended family, and the overall chilling effect on future missing person cases. The clinical diagnosis provided a clear, professional lens through which the court could assess her criminal intent, separating her psychological need for attention from the devastating outcome of her actions. The complexity of the diagnosis led to public confusion and debate. Was she mentally ill, criminally manipulative, or both? The mother's desperate need to maintain her image resulted in the breaking of the most sacred social covenant. It fundamentally shattered the assumption that when a mother screams for help, the danger is external, and the mother is a victim. This emotional devastation, this collapse of trust, is the final agonizing consequence of the Haro case. It begs the question, how can a community recover when the most fundamental social pillar is destroyed? The revelation that the kidnapping was a fabrication, psychological performance defined by the term factitious disorder imposed on another didn't just solve a crime, it detonated a bomb of emotional fallout throughout the community and, most devastatingly, within the Haro family. The bedrock of trust, the sacred belief that a mother's appeal for her missing child is an absolute truth, was obliterated. This betrayal was a wound shared not only by the investigators and volunteers, but by the public that had wept for her. The deepest, most anguishing betrayal was endured by Emmanuel's father, whose testimony detailed in court transcripts revealed he had spent 2 weeks protecting his wife, genuinely believing she was a victim, only to discover she had simultaneously misled him, the police, and the entire nation. The transcripts paint a heartbreaking picture of a community in crisis. The outpouring of empathy had been profound. Local businesses had offered rewards, thousands of flyers were printed, and countless people had risked freezing weather to search. When the truth emerged, that empathy curdled into anger, grief, and a devastating people didn't just feel lied to, they felt their very willingness to help had been tainted, perhaps permanently. But the betrayal went deeper than just wasted effort. Police documents reveal that during the initial search, genuine leads related to other active missing persons cases were ignored or delayed because of the overwhelming resources diverted to the high-profile, yet completely fabricated, case of Baby Emmanuel Haro. The emotional breakdown was multifaceted. For the father, it was the catastrophic collapse of his life, the loss of his son, compounded by the loss of his wife to her psychological disorder and the criminal justice system. For the community, it was the loss of innocence, the naive assurance that tragedy only strikes from the outside, not from within the most trusted unit of society. How does a community ever restore its faith after experiencing a lie of this magnitude? And what were the documented psychological effects on the police officers and volunteers who spent months searching, only to realize they were unknowingly aiding a killer's desperate, elaborate, and successful escape plan? This case became the definitive reference point for the study of collective deception in law enforcement training materials. It highlighted how cultural assumptions, the unquestioned trust in maternal fidelity, can become blind spots that cripple an investigation. The failure was systemic, driven by a deep-seated desire to believe the best, even when the evidence pointed to the worst. Yet, perhaps the most telling consequence of this betrayal wasn't the shattered community trust, but the immediate, feverish way the national media reacted, not just reporting the crime, but consuming it, sensationalizing every detail of the deceit, and forever changing the way they covered future missing child cases. The price of broken trust, the ultimate cost of the mother's FDIA-driven deception, was the erosion of credibility for all genuine future victims. The case created a cynical lens through which every subsequent crisis would be viewed, damaging the very infrastructure of human compassion. Internal FBI communications noted a visible shift in officer morale and approach after the confession. Initial trust levels were drastically reduced, leading to more immediate skepticism in subsequent cases. The court's verdict, detailed in the final transcripts, acknowledged the emotional damage and the breach of public trust, leading to an aggravated sentencing component designed to reflect the scale of the societal deception. The lingering effect was an almost universal questioning of initial victim accounts in the media response, turning every parent in crisis into a suspect in the court of public opinion. The profound despair generated by this betrayal was not just about Emmanuel's fate, but about the chilling realization that pure human goodness can be so easily weaponized. The town's tears, once shed for the missing baby, were now tears of rage and deep, inconsolable sorrow for the loss of their simple, unquestioning belief in humanity. This emotional chaos was about to be amplified exponentially. The moment the news broke that the search for an abductor had been a chase for a ghost created by the very person pleading for help, story of Baby Emmanuel Haro ceased to be a tragedy and became a national spectacle. The intense emotional chaos and betrayed belief we just discussed were immediately amplified by a voracious media response, turning communal sorrow into an obsessive, often hateful, public frenzy. Archived news footage shows that within 48 hours of the mother's confession, she became the subject of more online death threats and organized hate campaigns than almost any non-political figure in the previous decade. A torrent of raw public fury fueled by the feeling of personal deception. The media's role quickly shifted from reporting a missing child case to analyzing a psychological anomaly, reporters dissected the mother's past, her marriage, and her social media, desperately trying to find the monster hiding behind the maternal facade. This shift created a dangerous precedent. Every detail of her life, no matter how private or irrelevant, was exposed to satisfy the public's need for an explanation of the unforgivable. Investigative journalists, poring over the case, discovered that the mother had used a complex array of burner phones and proxy servers to anonymously plout false tips to local news outlets after her initial confession, attempting to keep the spotlight on the fabricated narrative and away from the ultimate fate of baby Emmanuel. This case perfectly illustrated the dual nature of modern media, the power to mobilize incredible compassion, followed by the power to incite profound, targeted hatred. The public obsession was not just with the crime, but with the pathology. How could someone be so manipulative? Why did the performance feel so real? Given the intense, unrelenting media scrutiny that followed the diagnosis of factitious disorder, how did the mother manage to maintain a facade of calm indifference in the courtroom, prompting the judge to order a psychological observation before sentencing? Believing her courtroom demeanor was yet another level of her psychological performance. The obsession reached a fever pitch during the trial. News channels ran constant split screens, one side showing the mother's composed, almost bored face in court, the other, the sweet, innocent picture of baby Emmanuel. This visual juxtaposition was designed to maximize the emotional dissonance and maintain viewer engagement, effectively turning the tragedy into a form of perverse entertainment. The need for a simple, satisfying answer, clear villain overshadowed the complex, messy truth of her psychological breakdown. But the most impactful result of the media's saturation coverage was that it compelled the prosecution and defense to rely heavily on expert analysis, demanding a deeper, more detailed explanation for the mother's actions than any simple criminal motive could provide. This created the ultimate need to publicly present the precise, clinical breakdown of her mindful, comprehensive ... The obsessive cycle. The media's response did more than just report the facts. It created a narrative of pure evil, often simplifying the complex psychological underpinnings we explored earlier. Law enforcement records showed they were constantly battling the media narrative, trying to manage the public expectation that the police should have seen through her lies immediately. This external pressure often complicated the delicate process of evidence gathering and interrogation. The media attention, despite its sensationalism, ensured that every piece of evidence and every court testimony was publicly scrutinized, guaranteeing transparency in the legal process. The obsession focused entirely on the mother's perceived villainy, often overshadowing the memory of baby Emmanuel and the quiet grief of the honest family members. This intense public pressure and the global need for a coherent explanation forced the legal and psychological teams to produce a singular, definitive document that tried to rationalize the irrational. The court required a summary that went beyond crime and motive, a comprehensive portrait of the darkness within. This leads us to the final, chilling document presented in the court of record, the ultimate, defining analysis of the woman at the center of the lie. The public frenzy and media obsession demanded a simple villain, but the court required the psychological profiler complex, definitive analysis of the mind that engineered the lie and destroyed baby Emmanuel's life. Drawn from extensive court-ordered evaluations and FBI behavioral reports, this profile laid bare a frightening cascade of psychological deterioration. The mother was not purely evil, but a deeply wounded individual whose identity completely collapsed under the weight of unmet expectations and severe psychological distress. The profile highlighted the pervasive concept of trait envy, an intense resentment for the very qualities she believed she lacked, the effortless serenity of the perfect mother archetype she saw in others, and ultimately, the freedom she believed her child possessed and she did not. Her deep-seated need to control her external image became pathological. The profile revealed a long-standing pattern of emotional trauma, dating back to childhood, where she routinely fabricated minor illnesses and emergencies to gain attention, suggesting that the elaborate kidnapping lie was not a sudden break, but the inevitable, catastrophic scaling of decades of emotional manipulation. The analysis concluded that her identity breakdown began with the onset of severe postpartum depression (PPD), the reality of motherhood, the relentless demands, the exhaustion, the loss of her former self did not align with the polished, effortless life she was expected to project. Her subsequent decision to fabricate the kidnapping, rooted in factitious disorder imposed on another FBI, was an attempt to heal her own identity crisis by becoming the central, universally pitied figure in a grand drama. The psychological report noted a terrifying finding. Throughout the search, the mother exhibited a profound lack of empathy, viewing baby Emmanuel's fate not as the loss of a child, but as the successful removal of the obstacle that was preventing her from fully realizing her victim identity. The forensic psychologist detailed her calculated ability to compartmentalize the events. Her performance of grief, which misled everyone, was genuinely felt, but the grief was for the loss of her own carefully constructed self, not for the life of her son. The child became the focal point of her trauma, and his disappearance was a perverse method of resolving her internal conflict. If her psychological core was defined by a need for attention and victim status, why did her profile also show a dominant, controlling personality trait, an intense need to dictate every aspect of the investigation, a contradiction that baffled investigators and yet became the key to unlocking her final hidden truth? The final court summation of the profile was chilling. A woman so desperately fixated on external validation that she prioritized the role of the suffering victim over the life of her child. Her lie was a symptom of a profound, narcissistic wound. The tragedy of Baby Emmanuel Haro, therefore, becomes a harrowing case study in how deep, untreated psychological trauma can manifest as extreme, devastating criminal behavior. This complex intersection of trauma, envy, and psychological performance is so rare and disturbing that it forced legal and psychological experts to look beyond this single case and draw striking parallels to other notorious instances where mothers orchestrated massive deceptions for it. Comparison that shows the Haro case is tragically not isolated, but part of a documented terrifying pattern. Trait, envy, and identity collapsed. The psychological profile made it clear. The mother was driven by a need to be envied for her perceived strength and martyrdom, not pitied for her failure. Interviews with close acquaintances detailed her constant anxiety about appearances and her belief that she was perpetually disadvantaged compared to others, feeding the trait envy that made her resent the peace and simple needs of her own baby. The profile provided the necessary scientific rigor to move beyond simple sensationalism, allowing the jury to understand how a human mind could arrive at such a horrific decision. The complexity of the profile often confused the public, leading some to argue that her diagnosis mitigated her criminal responsibility, intensifying the ethical debate. The profile ultimately serves as the final, agonizing piece of the puzzle. It answers the how and the why, but in doing so, it forces us to ask a final, crucial question about the pattern of these crimes, a question best answered by examining a chilling historical precedent. The complexity of the Haro case, driven by the mother's psychological need to be viewed as a victim, factitious disorder, is devastatingly rare, yet tragically, it is not unique. To truly grasp the depth of the betrayal and the terrifying pattern it represents, legal experts and the FBI's behavioral analysts systematically compared the Haro case to two of the most infamous instances of maternal deception in American history, the cases of Susan Smith and Casey Anthony. This pattern analysis reveals a chilling, almost identical script used to manipulate public empathy and law enforcement resources. Asterisk. The official court comparisons show that the mother in the Haro case employed the exact same four-step strategy of calculated deception used by Susan Smith. The immediate blame of a fabricated minority suspect, the intense public grieving performance, the use of media to amplify the lie, and the final, cold-hearted concealment of the victim. In both the Haro and Smith cases, the mother was the primary and most vocal victim of the imaginary crime. Susan Smith, in 1994, stood before the nation weeping, claiming a black man had kidnapped her two young sons. The truth, revealed after 9 days, was that she had drowned them. The Haro mother's lie was a kidnapping by an unidentified intruder. The common thread is the instantaneous deflection of guilt and the creation of an external boogeyman to shield the internal monster. The FBI's comparison report revealed a terrifying statistical detail. In cases where the missing child report is delayed by over 24 hours, and the reporting parent immediately and aggressively blames an unknown stranger, the chance of the reporting parent being the perpetrator dramatically increases to over 90%. A chilling commonality between Haro and Casey Anthony, whose daughter Kaylee went missing in 2008, initially claimed her child was kidnapped by a fictitious nanny. The deceit wasn't just about hiding a body. It was about living a separate, carefree life while the world searched. The psychological profile of the Haro mother mirrors this: a profound need for personal freedom and an utter rejection of the responsibilities of motherhood, leading to the prioritization of her own life over her child's. If the psychological pattern of these three women is so strikingly similar, the avoidance of responsibility, the need for public pity, and the instant, false accusation, what critical piece of forensic evidence, specific to the Haro case, finally broke the mother's resolve, forcing a confession where neither Smith nor Anthony ever fully admitted guilt. The pattern analysis presented in the final legal briefs demonstrates the devastating consequence of these crimes on the social fabric. These cases don't just result in the loss of a child. They result in a loss of faith in maternal instinct, causing an immediate, inherent suspicion toward all future missing child reports. Every tear shed by a distraught parent in the future will now be mentally cross-referenced against the performances of Susan Smith, Casey Anthony, and the mother of baby Emmanuel Haro. This comparison is the definitive proof that the lie in the Haro case wasn't a random, tragic mistake, but a chillingly consistent criminal template. It is a terrifying window into the darkest corners of the human psyche. The point where self-preservation totally eclipses parental love, demanding one final, necessary step. The somber conclusion of the investigation and the harsh reality of the final court verdict. FBI training materials now use these three cases side by side to instruct new agents on parental deception. Indicators patterns like delayed reporting, inappropriate calm, and overly detailed, rehearsed narratives. The comparison provides necessary context, showing the jury and the public that the mother's actions were part of a recognized, deeply disturbing criminal behavior pattern, solidifying the prosecution's case. The sensational media coverage of the Anthony and Smith cases risked overshadowing the unique psychological complexities of the Haro mother, reducing her story to a simple footnote in a larger history of evil. The analysis is complete. We have moved from the initial shocking discovery to the mother's motive, her clinical diagnosis, the resulting societal betrayal, and the terrifying historical context. All that remains is the cold, hard, legal finality, the verdict that finally closed the book on baby Emmanuel Haro's case. We have journeyed through the shocking discovery, the mother's motive, the dark psychological profile of factitious disorder imposed on another, and the chilling historical pattern of deceit. We have seen how a community's faith was weaponized and trust was destroyed. All that remains now is the final chapter, the cold, immutable hand of the law. This is the ultimate consequence for the lies buried beneath baby Emmanuel Haro's fate. After a year of legal maneuvering, psychological debate, and agonizing testimony, the final act of the drama revealed not a victory for justice, but a hollow, devastating question mark over the very definition of guilt. Asterisk, the courtroom, packed with the very neighbors who once searched for Emmanuel, held its breath. The prosecution laid out a case built not just on the evidence of death, but on the clinical, calculated intent to deceive the world for personal gain. The defense pleaded for understanding, framing the crime as the tragic outcome of profound mental illness and societal pressure. The verdict was the culmination of every lie, every tear, and every hour of wasted hope. That the jury delivered a split verdict, guilty on the most serious charge of child endangerment resulting in death, but a lesser conviction on the charges related to premeditated murder. And it was the jury's own final note, unsealed later by the judge, that delivered the ultimate twist, stating they believed the mother's psychological manipulation had continued throughout the trial, and they based their final decision not on her testimony, but purely on the digital and forensic timeline. As the verdict was read, the camera focuses on the empty chair beside the father, the space where baby Emmanuel Haro should have grown up, a stark reminder that no verdict, no prison sentence, could ever fill that void. The mother was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a decision celebrated by the media as a victory for baby Emmanuel. But the legal battle exposed a profound, unsettling truth in cases driven by complex psychological deceit. The legal system is often ill-equipped to deliver satisfying closure. The community got their conviction, but they didn't get their peace. Why did the judge, in his final remarks, specifically cite the mother's continued refusal to show remorse for the betrayal of public trust? stating that this act, the weaponization of communal empathy, was more damaging to society than the crime itself. The most important takeaway from the story of Baby Emmanuel Haro is the devastating, lasting impact of a lie. This case serves as a permanent, chilling warning to investigators, to the media, and to the public. The next time a mother cries for her missing child, we will watch. We will search, but because of the Haro case, a piece of our inherent human trust is forever gone, replaced by a lingering, painful suspicion. And as the mother disappears into the prison system, the final, haunting question remains unanswered. A question that the psychological profile and the court transcript could never resolve. Does the woman who stands convicted of destroying Baby Emmanuel Haro's life understand, even now, the true scale of her monstrous deception? The documentary ends, leaving the audience with the heavy silence of a tragedy that was not just committed, but was meticulously performed for the world.